going to call the Board of Selectmen meeting for October 10th, 2017 to order. As required by open meeting law, we are informing you that we will be video, audio taping, as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience wishing to video or audio tape must notify the chairman now. With that, please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Anyone for weekly briefing?
Hi, Carolyn Kerr, the Community Center Director. I just wanted to remind everyone that this Saturday from 11 to 2 is the Touch a Truck event in the parking lot on the recreation side of the building. It is a free event, and we are working with the Water Department, Highway Department, Police, Fire, Golf, and anyone else would like to bring a truck over? No, I'm just... And then I also want to remind you, on the 20th is our boutique, where children can come in and pick out a costume for free, and we're still accepting costumes. If anyone would like to drop those off, we appreciate it. And the last thing is, I just left the Cultural Center, where they are forming a Friends of the Cultural Center group, so if people are interested, please get in touch with one of us, and we will get you the contact person's phone number.
Great.
Thank you.
Anyone else for weekly briefing? Public comment and announcement?
I'm Janet Cassidy, Director of the Brooks Academy Museum. The Harwich Historical Society invites you to meet the spirits of Harwich past when we do our annual lantern tour of the Congregational Church Cemetery. That will be October 14th, which is this Saturday, and next week, October 21st. Tours are at 6, 6:30 and 7, and cost $10. You need to call the museum to make a reservation at 508-432-8089. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else for public comment and announcement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Jack Brown. I'm here in my role as president of the Harwich Council, Friends of the Harwich Council on Aging, not to be confused with the Council on Aging. I want to remind you that on October 20th, we're having a dinner dance from 5:30 to 8:30 at the Seaview in Dennisport. We'll have a 20-piece band, big band sound music. We'll have a good dinner, a lot of eating fun, and tickets are available with the Harwich Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Cindy Williams there is helping us out. And you can call Richard Waystack at 508-776-0964 or myself, Jack Brown, at 508-868-0743. We're down to the wire here last few days, and I got to admit, we could sell some more tickets. A little bit of help, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Michael.
Anyone else for public comment and announcement? Moving on to the consent agenda. Larry, we're going to hold F.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I move the following items on the consent agenda. A, approve minutes, September 25th, 2017, regular session. B, authorize chairman to sign representative letter for single audit fiscal year 16 for Muddy Creek. C, approve town administrator's recommendation on Perks Entertainment license. D, vote to remove Darren Giddens as a member of the Harwich Energy Committee due to lack of attendance. E, vote to accept the resignation of Michael Glenn as a member of the Bikeways Committee. And as you said, we'll hold F.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve consent agenda as item A through E. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. I ask that F be hold because I have questions on the contract process as well as the contract itself. I've agreed to meet with Chris and Deputy Chief Tom Gagnon to go over that contract this week, and we'll bring it back for Tom's request 2 weeks from tonight. Is that okay with the board? Okay. Thank you. Moving on to public hearings and presentations. First up, we have Monomoy Regional School District. meeting with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee to discuss enrollment by class and demographics, including a 5-year projection of the same. Scott, come on up. Any members of the Finance Committee as well? This was in our packet last week. Scott couldn't be with us. There was a few questions from board members, and we decided then we would bring this back and ask Scott to join us. So welcome, Scott. Thank you.
Can you get it?
And Jack Brown and Mark from the Finance Committee. No quorum, so I don't imagine you have to call your meeting to order. Chris, should they, or they?
Yeah, no, I don't think they need to call, they don't have.
Thank you, James.
Scott, do you want to just kind of give a highlight again, and then we'll get on to the
Sure.
questions that we had?
So, I believe in the packet that you had received, I sent both town managers of Chatham and Harwich an email that was summarizing a report that I was giving about what we call on the school side the October 1 numbers. So every year, we are supposed to report to the state what the enrollment is in each of our districts based on what's the enrollment on October 1. So this, we were putting this together, or pulling this together as the month of September was coming to an end to present on the Thursday before October 1 at the school committee meeting. The news that I presented is good news in a sense. When we started to talk about the direction that we wanted to ideally see Monomoy go, the big thing was, let's try to keep our Harwich and Chatham families with us in the school district and see few of our children choicing out to charter schools or to other school districts. And I think the numbers that we see are really positive in that direction. In fact, if we go back to the year that I started here, the outflow, the net total outflow of children to charter and other school districts, it was a net 47 student attrition from the district, and that has gone down to 30 in this current in the current year's numbers. There was a period of time actually during the formation of the district, primarily at the middle school, where we were seeing more attrition out, and I think that the program and culture that we've seen develop over the last couple of years at the middle school has greatly helped that. So we've actually shrunk the number of students that have been choicing out of the district in half in just the past year. So we're seeing a lot of forward progress on that end. And what we also see in the October 1 numbers is we see a school district that has an overall enrollment that's relatively flat, but we see a school district that's seeing a age shift where we're seeing decreasing numbers at the elementary levels. We have Chatham Elementary in 1 year is down by 12%, and Harwich Elementary down by almost 3% in 1 year. And so we're seeing this declining enrollment at the elementary levels, and that isn't lost to choice in other school districts. That's just what's happening across the Cape. Fewer and fewer families with school-aged children, and I think it's something that we, as two towns, Chatham and Harwich, might need to look at. Are there things that we can do in our two towns to go and keep more families with us? Are our two towns affordable for young families, so that we're seeing that that younger age group? This is offset by a bubble of what were fourth graders last year that have now moved up to the middle school. So we see that our middle school enrollment has gone up by over 6.5%, and our high school enrollment has ticked up a little bit, so that we're seeing we're seeing this bubble of kids in that 5th grade range. And as those 5th graders mature over the next couple of years, when those 5th graders or 8th graders at the high school is actually going to be at capacity. That high school was built for a capacity of 700. And if we have an attrition of kids like we're currently seeing this year, we're likely going to be slightly over 700, but this is not me saying, Jack, we're going to need to expand the building. No, we're going to be fine with the building, and we've tried to thoughtfully look at enrollment over the last 4 years to not see us at a situation where I'm coming before either select board saying, okay, well, we now have so many kids who have choiced into the district that you can't fit them all at the high school. We've been trying to shoot for that 700 number and hit that enrollment with the emphasis of trying to keep our families, our families from Harwich and Chatham with us, and where there is space available in our classrooms to invite families from other districts to take advantage of those space available slots. Let's see. So there are some other things that I shared in terms of good news in the numbers. One of the things that I think is quite positive at the high school. This is really the first year that we're seeing the inflow to the high school exceeding the outflow, so that we have we have at the high school level there are 45 students that have left the high school. And the way we do this is look at how many students are in the last year's 7th grade class, and how many show up again as 8th graders. So so looking at who's leaving, but also who's coming. So we're seeing 3 more kids have come into the high school than have left the high school, and I think a real positive sign on what's also happening at the high school is that we're seeing for the first time families that that had been in the Nauset system, some of them from from districts served by the Nauset system, but some of them that have Harwich and Chatham zip codes that have choiced back, given the programs and opportunities that they see now at Monomoy Regional High School. So it's nice to see that dynamic start to shift. At the high school, one of the things I also tried to point out is that in any given year, we see roughly 20 students will go and select at the high school level Cape Cod Cape Tech for the high school option. So we've actually seen so many students choicing into the high school or coming back into the high school that we've actually offset that loss of 20 students that typically happens as students go from 8th grade to 9th grade. So again, that's something that we haven't really seen in past years. At the middle school level, we've seen a reduction in students that are choicing out. We have at the middle school level, we see 44 students that are going out of the middle school in terms of that cohort change, offset by 24 students coming in. So there's a net loss. There's a net loss of 20 there. The bulk of those students that are leaving us, we do have a number of them that are that have looked towards the Lighthouse Charter School as the option. So so of that group, 11 of them have looked at Lighthouse Charter School, and we have 9 that have looked at Nauset, one that has looked at DY as an option. But again, compared to 1 year ago, that number's almost cut in half. So we've seen a pretty dramatic change in where students students are going, and more families that are sticking with us, which is a good, I mean, it's a sign that the program and opportunities are ones that we want, we want families to stay with us, and there's, this is sort of the first year that we're really seeing that happen, where it's significantly different than, before the district was formed. I also shared with the school committee just some concerns that that I have out there, and I've alluded to this with this board, and also when speaking before the Chatham Selectmen. Elementary enrollment's is a challenge for us, and it's not just that elementary enrollment's in a decline, but it's just the dynamic that is playing out between the two elementary schools. This past year, because of a elementary enrollment decline at Chatham Elementary School, I moved an elementary teacher over to Harwich Elementary School to balance out class sizes. So, so we have 2 kindergarten sections at Chatham Elementary School, so next year we will have 2 first grade sections, and if the demographics don't change, we'll see 2 kindergarten, so slowly but surely we're seeing Chatham Elementary School become smaller and smaller, and one of the reasons for that is that prior to regionalization, there was a significant number of Harwich families that looked towards Chatham Elementary as a choice option that had slightly smaller class sizes, and you saw about 20% of your children choicing over to Chatham Elementary School. And on my end, it's let's go and make sure that the class sizes are the same between the 2 elementary schools, which then creates less of a want and need to choice over. And at the end of elementary school, the middle school that everyone's going to is the same. So we're seeing more Harwich families staying at Harwich Elementary School. Chatham Elementary keeps getting a little smaller and a little smaller. But as we shifted 1 elementary teacher over to Harwich Elementary School, we've maxed out available classrooms. So if we kind of look forward, I don't really have the option to stick another teacher over there because there's not a classroom for that teacher to go into. So we already have a dynamic that's in play where Harwich Elementary School classrooms are slightly larger than Chatham Elementary Schools. It's been that way ever since I've gotten here to the district. We've done a nice job of narrowing that gap, so so it's only a 1 to 2 child difference in a classroom, but still that 1 to 2 children in a classroom is tangible if you're the teacher, and if this dynamic continues over the next couple years, we're going to see that the number of children in Harwich Elementary classrooms relative to Chatham Elementary classrooms grow, which doesn't provide sort of equity between the 2 elementary classrooms. And you can imagine for my staff, my staff the first year that the district came together, where the Harwich Elementary classrooms were much larger than the Chatham Elementary classrooms, they're very aware that that they might have 25% more kids, more kids in a room. So so I think it's a conversation that I shared with the school committee. I have a number of meetings that I will be holding over the course of the next couple weeks in Monomoy, just to meet with parents and first ask how the start time shift has gone, but also to talk with them about this phenomena that is happening at the elementary level, and talk about what are some of the solutions and options to go and balance out class sizes, and not see a situation where Harwich Elementary is bursting at the seams and Chatham Elementary has a lot of vacant classrooms, and that's kind of where things are heading given the way the regional agreement is currently phrased. So there are some options to look at, but that's long and short of all the different topics that were covered, and I'd be happy to take questions and answer them as best I can.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for coming tonight. Don, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Scott, I just had a couple, I do have two questions that are wholly different. The first one, we've had discussions here about workforce housing, affordable housing. Have you worked with either of the town planners about what everything is going to look like in 10 or 15 years in different scenarios? Because the enrollment, based on what the demographics of Harwich and Chatham are right now, they're well up into the 40s with over 65 residents.
The answer is no, I haven't. Happy to as best I can. And just a quick note, I think one of the things I didn't answer in the things that you initially asked is, where do I see us over the course of the next 5 years? I actually think that the enrollment, we're looking at a flat enrollment this year and next year, and as that bubble continues to move up into the high school, I think we're going to see relatively flat enrollment. Where we potentially see it start to drop off quickly is when, as those current fifth graders hit junior, senior year, we're going to start to see our enrollment start to tail off as a district. But we do need to think more globally about how do we attract a balanced community, and what sort of options are out there. I know that I think in my former district, I think a lot of people on my staff, a lot of teachers, couldn't afford to live in the town that they worked. But as different sorts of affordable housing options were made available within the town, I start to see more and more of my staff actually taking advantage of those, and you start. So I think there are things that can happen in towns to support that. I was having a conversation with Chris just last week. That it might be interesting to go and survey our staffs, from on the town side and the school side, and kind of get a feel for that the demographics. Who's got do we see our younger staff with families here, or are they choosing a neighboring community that they might see as more affordable, and what can we do on our end to have young firefighters, young policemen, young teachers living in Harwich and Chatham?
Thank you. The second question, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but I mean, it was a long-term trend, and it does translate into money. I had noticed with a fair amount of curiosity a decade ago that the fifth grade in our school system, which arguably, if you're talking about choice, they're choicing out to another elementary school, not to a middle school, largely, on the Cape. The question I have is that there was a spike, and I suspected it had something to do with developmental issues and the fact that the middle school is run in a different manner than the elementary school. But there was a really large spike every year in the fifth grade of SPED IEP students, and that translates into like a financial burden too. And it was always a different Johnny and a different Jill that was involved, because the grade is where it happened, not with the particular kids. Have you noticed any diminution of that, or
so where there are limited options until the transition from fifth grade to sixth grade, and that's where in the information that I provided you on the transfer out of Monomoy, we see from fourth to fifth there's a loss of 9 students, but from fifth to sixth, 21 students. The bulk of those 21 students, or over half of them, are heading to Lighthouse Charter. That's Lighthouse Charter is a 6, 7, 8 school. So that's where we see a piece of it. We also see, I would say, the remainder of those students are largely looking at Nauset Regional, and again, I think some of what we're dealing with is, we'll call it vestiges of the past that, that if you have an older sibling who already went that direction for sports or academics, there's a good chance that you are going to be following in your older siblings' shoes. But I think the more that we can keep the oldest child with us, the more we're going to keep the siblings, the siblings that follow us with us. And Lighthouse, Lighthouse Charter, the way the charter schools are, I think sometimes you'll see in a school district some fluctuation also happening there. So I don't know for sure if this is a trend or not, or just just a, we'll call it a fortuitous chance situation, because enrollment at the charter school is subject to lottery. So it's how many of our kids got into or drawn out of that lottery, and there's also a sibling preference piece to that. So I think that what we've seen is the spots where we've historically lost students, at least this year at the middle school, a lot of improvement at the high school. We've actually seen, from a net attrition, that's really kind of balanced itself out. Where we have typically lost kids is to Nauset when I first got here, and that seems to have been balancing itself out.
I kind of only brought up that first part to get to the second part, though. Is whether or not it was they were going because they were having problems with the system or not, there was a spike in the overt number of kids who were in IEPs, in special ed, from 4th grade to 5th grade.
Right.
I could infer from that it could possibly be that we started kids in a middle school environment sooner than other people did. But regardless of that, I was wondering if you had experienced during the time the construct, whether it was an execution problem, whether that number has actually come down, or if it's still higher.
So my take is that I think mathematically you could say that there's an increase in students with need, either students that have English language learning need, or students with special education need, or students that are coming from households that financially struggle in those key times when you see choice out of the district by grade. And the reason I'd say that mathematically you'd see a little increase is that it's not a heterogeneous group that choices out, and so I've talked with my own school committee and with Chris about this. The students that choice out, that head off to Sturgis or head off to Lighthouse, I believe one of all of the kids that have choiced out had an MCAS score that wasn't in the proficient or advanced category. You see a disproportional number of students who come from families with means, because to choice out you have to have a parent who can drive you to that placement. So there's a financial mean difference, but there's also a difference where the families that are choicing out have students who academically succeeded, which I think gives you some of that on the other side.
That isn't the question, but I'm not going to belabor it here. If you could forward some stats, because it arguably would cost more per student if they're in an IEP as opposed to just the general population.
So are you talking about kids that are choicing into the district?
I'm talking about neither. I'm just saying that statistically, a kid in the 5th grade is more likely to, or had been more likely, in the Harwich system. And I'm just kind of curious with the cost of education and the fact that we don't align exactly with the other middle schools, whether or not you've been able to bring that down over your tenure with the regional school system. But there was a disparity every single year. The 4th grade had, and I'm just making up a number, but 24% of the kids were in special ed. And in the 5th grade, 32% had it. And year in and year out, that was the exact same thought. So this isn't like something where a family moved in and they had a special need that we weren't addressing. This was every
Yeah.
family that moved from the 4th grade to the 5th grade.
I'm happy to go do some research.
If you could get back to me,
I get
that's
that. My experience has been that you'll see families may, for anxiety reasons, sometimes look at as they have a child that's heading from a middle school to a high school, seeks services, or going from elementary to middle school, and so I think the transitional grade that you might be talking about that might be part of it. I think another a high school that has 8th graders at it is now not we have 8th graders, so does DY. So I think there seems to be a blend of different sort of grade levels at the school site. But I'll go
Mine
and
is
look at
just
that.
solely on the cost of operation and aligning. It has nothing to do with choice. It's just, if that's been brought down, it would become cheaper.
When next week come, I will have my special ed numbers, and I'll work with my student service to add that piece to the presentation.
Thank you, Scott. Janelle?
So one of the things that I am impressed by at Monomoy is the preschool programs. And you've handed us this nice brochure. I'm wondering, you're advertising it now as Monomoy preschool programs, so are these Harwich elementary programs open now to Chatham residents as well? Or maybe are we going to transition toward that, or actually add preschool classrooms to Chatham?
So I guess the answer is we'll need to go and look at what sort of space we have available. So at the moment, all of the elementary classroom spaces we have, sans one what was a kindergarten classroom in Chatham, are filled. So there is a elementary classroom that happens to be available at Chatham Elementary that we could look at. Do we add another preschool classroom? And if we do add another preschool classroom, it ends up with me coming before a board like this and saying, we'd like to add a preschool classroom. It has a cost. I included the preschool sheet, the preschool flyer, for a reason. And if I look at what's one thing that communities can do to help young families, looking at how we do preschool in our towns, or how we might support preschool options, is one thing. And it's like I can remember the days when it seemed like a third of our family income went to supporting the we'll call it preschool / childcare needs. And I think the important thing to note about the preschool flyer that I gave you is that the Monomoy integrated preschool, it's a great option for families because it's something that is I think very affordable, but it's not necessarily conducive for a family that has to have a parent that's working full-time, or two parents that are working full-time, because it's a half-day program. And whereas there is a program that has operated out of Harwich Elementary School called Make Way for Kids that developed from a grant that we get and support from the Children's Place, that is a full-day option, and it has a sliding tuition scale. So it has the initial mission of that program really looked at young parents, grandparents that are raising children, families with economic need, to provide some additional supports. In maybe a more urban area, you have preschool programs like Headstart that would be there as an option for families. Headstart isn't out in this area of the Cape to provide, an option for families. The integrated preschool that both Chatham Elementary and Harwich Elementary have are half-day programs. You'll find that every school district will have this type of program because by mandate, students that are of preschool age with special needs need to start receiving services. And what school districts do is they have this integrated approach where for every child with need, with special needs, there's a peer model who is there, so that you have a mix of students with special needs and those without, in class sizes that are roughly around 12 students in the, so you'll have 12 students that are in a 3-year-old program in the morning, and 12 students in a roughly 12 students in a 4-year-old program in the morning, and that's happening at both Chatham Elementary and Harwich Elementary, so that we have 2 classrooms going at Harwich Elementary and 1 classroom going at Chatham Elementary. I know that there are other families, out there who have needs, I think, more along the lines of Make Way for Kids, where they would benefit from a full day option. And we don't have the space to do full day options for all families, but I'm also very sensitive that we've got some really wonderful preschool operations in our towns, and it's like on the school side, I don't want to go and see us putting something in place that then puts a local business out of out of business, and we're with a declining young population, if we were to do if we were to start doing preschool on the school side, it potentially creates a situation where a local establishment might not have the children in it, there. So, but I also think that there are examples out there of public-private ways to accommodate this too. So.
One more question.
Go ahead, Gino.
And then the other question I have is really about demographics of enrollment, and I'm wondering if you know, basically breaking down the enrollment that we have, especially at the younger grades, because that's what we're talking about, is decreasing income bracket, ethnicity, that kind of demographics, just so we can kind of compare and contrast what's going on.
I don't have that here in a printout for
No,
you.
I don't.
I'll include that in my next presentation. There's one thing that in the sheets that I gave you on who's coming into the district that I think is an important one to note. So we saw at the middle school level 24 students have come into Monomoy. Of those 24 students, 6 of them have come from other countries. So a quarter of the families that are joining our district each year right now have English language learning needs. So I think that's something that that I think is it's a very rapid demographic shift that that the district's having, and these are students who frequently need more services than your average student. At the high school level, very similar trend. There's 48 students are coming in. Of those 48 students, 5 of them are coming from Jamaica. So again, kids that need some ELL service, English language learning services. So we're seeing. I think when I first came to the district, I was doing budget presentations. Part of my budget presentations back when Larry was having his first round on the select board and as chair is saying, hey, the English language learner population in both of our towns is creeping up, and I was talking about needing to add staff to support that need, because at the time, it was minimal what we had in place, and we're seeing more and more families coming to our two towns that need services like that. So there are things that you're seeing there that are sort of indicating some of the demographics that are shifting within our two towns relatively quickly.
Thank you,
Right.
Scott.
Thank you.
What's that? Julie?
Hi, Scott. I just have a couple questions. So I'm just wondering, in the same way that we have students coming into the district, and I think that's a good point at the elementary level and really overall, when we're gaining students and when we're losing students, who are they and what's the makeup? And seems like we know some of what's going on when kids are coming into the school district. Do we do any type of exit interview when the kids leave the school district?
We do. So, so the sheets I gave you, we've kind of logged every child that's going out and have talked with the family on the what's and whys. And I would say that the one area where we still need to make some headway is we're losing kids for athletic reasons, I think, more than we're losing them for academic reasons. It's not that there's some families who, will still say, hey, there's an academic reason that, that we're looking elsewhere. They're also, we are smaller than some of our neighboring districts, and there are some things that, some opportunities that they have in place that we don't, that families articulate. But I think more often than not, it is on that athletic front, and towards that end, one of the conversations that I had with both town managers and my athletic director and the town rec directors is, let's really start thinking about how we can start building the athletic programs, all the way down at the elementary level, support more of that. So, because, we've come a long ways in just 4 years. I remember my first weekend of Monomoy as superintendent. I jumped on a ferry and went over to Nantucket for a Monomoy football game, and I think at the time we had a handful of kids on the bench. We barely had enough kids to field a team. The nice thing is, yesterday I went and we had a full squad out there with tons of subs in a JV football game. I mean, we can field a full JV team plus plus a full varsity team that actually is having now a winning season. So it's I mean it's some nice changes have been going on, and I think that athletic success that our programs are starting to see, I think, is going to fuel more students saying, hey, here's the place to be. And I know that we also, even this past year we had we had our sort of fledgling varsity lacrosse season, and it wasn't a winning season for either the boys or the girls. But it was one of those things you could sit there and talk to the kids and say, hey, by the end of the season you were closing the gap, and we had mostly ninth graders out there playing juniors and seniors, and if we can stick together for 3 more years, you've built a really nice program. And now we start to see that we've got kids that were riding the pine in other districts starting to look and say, if I could be starting at Monomoy, and so we're seeing some athletes actually starting to look at our programs instead of our kids looking at their options, better options elsewhere. So it's still an area that I think is ripe for us to go and work on the town side and school side collaboratively.
No, I think that's a good idea on the sports. It's good to hear, because I think academically there's not a big difference really technically between Nauset and Monomoy
Yeah,
at this point.
And I shared, I've shared this, with people, and I know my own children hate when I talk about them, but I thought one of the nicest things is, I go every year, I take my son out to Chinatown for lunch with his buddies, and it's his buddies that he grew up with in the suburbs. And, so I'm at a table with a whole bunch, last year, a whole bunch of ninth graders at the end of their ninth grade year. It was really clear to me that the experience that my own son had at Monomoy and the academic rigor and challenges that he had and the sports opportunities he had a better opportunity here than what we left in a very nice suburban school district. And he kind of, we're driving back to the Cape, and he's like, I was taking harder classes than they were taking, and it's like I was starting and captain of my lacrosse team as a ninth grader, and they were, not getting playing time, on a JV team, and so I think he kind of was driving home, seeing, hey, this was a really great experience that that I had. And I think I've seen in my own daughter, that she's really blossomed down here, and I kind of credit, we've got some great teachers, we've got great teachers, we've got great opportunities for kids. They get a chance, in a small school district, you get a chance to play. We need you to play to have those teams. And
Right. Okay, thank you. The only other question I had was, I thought about a year ago or so, I sat in, to Danelle's point on the preschool, I thought that there was a program that the state was trying to get up and running on an all-day, but I might have my facts mixed up on that.
I think one of the things that, that I and I think other superintendents want to sort of push the state on is to really count preschoolers as students, so that we're seeing that the state money flow towards the school district for your preschoolers, and that's, they were, the state's hasn't treated them as sort of equal to to other students yet, and I think if you're looking at how do you go make this happen community-wide, it goes a long way if the state is really buying into supporting early education, because it does pay off in spades. If you get students that have those preschool opportunities, they're more school-ready in kindergarten and better off in first grade. And there's a lot of research that shows that that the academic achievement of those students is going to be better over the long haul for that early experiences, as a 3-year-old and 4-year-old.
And one other question. In terms of the Headstart program, that's the all-day program, is that right?
Right, but again, not anywhere near us on this part of the Cape.
Oh, right, no, but I mean our program at the elementary school. I'm just thinking of the logistics of what you're saying about how the elementary's at max. Is there any sense in taking the full-day program and moving that over to Chatham?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to look at is what's, it would have busing costs and everything else, but do we? I want to be very sensitive, as from the school side, if we were to put in an additional preschool on the public side, what impact does that have to a local business that's providing something that's similar but different? And I think both my wife and I worked full time. We didn't have the flexibility to have our children in an integrated preschool that was just a half day. We needed a full day option, and I want to be sensitive to the fact that it would be, if the school went and started to pull too many kids to this one type of option for families, and we saw options for families that need affordable, full-day, year-round options. Because again, the preschool is not a year-round. It's just 180 days.
Okay, yeah.
We want to make sure that we're not taking away options for families.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Larry?
Thanks for coming, Scott. I have a neighborhood 14-year-old girl who's going to be a valued member of the field hockey team if her dad doesn't kill her first for digging up the yard. So I'm hopeful for the athletics as well. I brought up the preschool last week, and I'm not sure of the definitions. I'm not talking childcare. I'm talking about pre-kindergarten or something, because we're proud of our education in Massachusetts, but it seems like we're falling behind. I know I have family in the Midwest, and they've all gone to a day, the pre-kindergarten, not childcare, but
Right.
I'm a little surprised by that we haven't.
So for us, it's they call it 2.9, but it's 2 years, 9 months, and so families can use the options that we have, but we have very limited options that we have on our side. Probably the exception out there in terms of communities is Mashpee went in just the last couple of years to providing for 4-year-olds. Think of the 2.9 as the 3-year-old group. So we have integrated preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds, half day, and that that provides some options for families to go and have their child get some sort of early school experiences and just all those intangibles about working together, sitting and listening. It's all these little pieces that help children be ready to learn when they hit kindergarten and
Yeah,
first
seems to be
grade.
very important.
So the more chances that's available, the better. But for those of us in the room that have household situations where both parents are working, or a single parent family where that parent's working, sometimes the integrated preschool model isn't a model that's accessible to them, and that's where it's been nice for Harwich that we have this Make Way for Kids program. But again, it's one classroom, and I know that I've had times where members from this board have reached out to me saying, "Hey, Scott, what sort of options? There's a family that that I know that has a need, and there are only so many slots there that are available. So it's one of those I definitely see a need out there. It's how do we address it, and if we address it, it's one of those. It gets to the FinCom side, saying, well, that's not in the budget that I currently have. It becomes an ad. But it was last year I had Chairman Dykens for the Chatham Selectmen asking if there was one thing that if I could wave my magic wand, what would I try to put in place in our communities? And I think they were thinking, it'd be like this science program or that. I actually think that if we could find a way to do something where there was a way to support families, to make sure that every family that wanted to have a early childhood experience, that I think that's something that would bolster education down the road, but also I think help families with young kids maybe find Harwich and Chatham to be a little bit more affordable than they currently are.
Thank you, Scott. Larry?
The later time starts. If you have long enough, you've learned anything about that?
Well,
Let's not get too deep. If that pertains to enrollment, I'll hear it. Otherwise, we'll hear it when you come back.
Yeah, how about this? I have heard of a couple families that have decided to choice into the district because of the start time. I haven't heard of families that have opted out because of, because of the start time, but I will be able to talk more about it after I have my little meetings over the next couple of weeks with parents to get some firsthand feedback. Having 2 teenagers that I live with, it's been a godsend on our end as a family. And I know families like Janelle who have younger kids. I'm sure that it was probably a seismic adjustment that they may still be wrestling with. So,
Thank you. Anything further, Larry?
No.
Jack?
Thank you, Scott. I was just thinking about this bubble, the 5th grade bubble, that's going to work its way through in a few years. But what's after that from everything you can see and think of once they clear the schools out?
yeah, I think that's the the $24,000 question, because if you look at the the birth rates that are happening in both of our towns, I think what we see for an elementary enrollment, which is it's down a little bit at each grade level. I think we're going to see that that continue. And at the moment, at none of the elementary grade levels is there a magic number that I could say, oh, if we could condense I think if I look at this at Chatham Elementary, currently we've got let's see, 40, I think it's 42 kids at grade 2, where there's 3 sections. And what we've tried to do ever since I've got here is have our elementary classes being 18 plus or minus 1, middle and high school classes 19 plus or minus 2. That 14, 3 sections of 14, I can't crunch it down to 2 without us going out of that guideline. And the same thing if I take the smallest class at Harwich and that has 6. So I think for Harwich it's I think it's the first graders where there's 16.2 students in there in 6 sections. If I was to go crunch that down to 5, I again go outside of that guideline. So I think we may see some some situations where we can stay within that guideline over the next couple years, but it's going to be pretty close, and because we're hovering right on this sort of little line where where we're seeing a fairly consistent just over 100 kids per per grade level at the elementary level.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Anything?
No questions.
All set, Mark? So just a comment, Scott. First, thank you for the presentation. Second, the kindergarten topic we've talked about a few times at this point, the busing kids from Harwich to Chatham to level the numbers. We started talking about the regional agreement changes about 6 months ago, if memory serves me correct.
Yeah.
Are we any further with that?
So the way I've left it with my board is I will be having discussions to educate as many elementary and as many families from our district as to the the long-term demographic challenges that our elementary schools will have, to hopefully get as much input from parents and families as to what their wants are. But we're gonna I think that's something then that my own board is going to need to wrestle with a little bit more given that feedback. So so I think on my board's end, we're probably looking at sort of October, superintendent reaching out to families and doing a sort of an education piece on what the long-range projections are for the elementary schools. And I figure I didn't want to do that in September because changes in start time was probably a big enough thing for families to go and wrestle with. Let's not have the superintendent start talking about, hey, we have one elementary school that I personally think, if the demographics continue, is going to get too small, and another elementary school that's going to be bursting at the seams, and what do we do? And and I think there are two ways to look at it. Do you shift a section of Harwich and say that section of Harwich would go to Chatham Elementary, and help make it so that class sizes are even and that one school's not too big and the other's not too small? Or do we look at a model that other communities have where one school becomes sort of the early education building, so that it's like a pre-K through 1, and the other building becomes a later elementary? The challenge there is it involves extra transitions for students. So so students would be transitioning from early elementary to mid-elementary to middle school to high school, and
We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all I need. Thank you, Scott. Anything further? We all set? Julie?
So based on what we're hearing, if we could get an all-day pre-K and affordable housing, maybe those were ways we could build our numbers.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I do, it's interesting, we've expanded our discussion from when I first started into other areas. And I know some folks attended that One Cape Summit about demographics. And, I think it would be worthwhile to almost have a special session where we just talk about demographics and how do we address, some of the concerns that if we don't have school-age kids, and get into some of these things, and how do we try to improve. Scott's already mentioned about, we tried doing that from a athletic side, just to get more discussion, and I think from a housing front, I think we need to continue to work on that. But I think that may be a nice workshop session, just to let the people in the community know that we have trends that we're up against that are unique, quite honestly, in the state, and we might as well start to understand what those trends are. I think the question about the demographics and the long term is a very valid one. But, that would be something that I think would be worth a longer discussion. Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thanks.
All set? Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Jack and Mark, review a management letter for FY16 is coming up if you want to stick around for that. Next up is annual meetings with the Selectmen. Tonight we have the Harwich Energy Committee. Larry Cole. Dr. Cole.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, I'm Larry Cole, Chairman of the Harwich Energy Committee. I had hoped to be able to introduce several of our members, but Barry Worth is here with us, and others are not able to make it. Our membership consists of Valerie Bell, who is the Harwich representative to the Cape Light Compact and also president of the board of Cape Self Alliance. Terry Hayden, our newest member, Charles Check, whom you appointed within the last 10 days or so. I haven't met him yet. He's been unable to take time to be sworn in, and he's in upstate New York at a funeral and probably won't get back before this meeting is over. Three of us then, Valerie and Terry and myself, we've been sworn in and we've completed the conflict of interest course, and that's on record with the town clerk. Barry, whom you appointed a few weeks ago, is postponing making a decision about whether to join us officially pending the outcome of a medical procedure that he's facing next month. I don't really have anything that I want to add to what's in the written report. I'll just briefly go through the main points of that for the benefit of the TV audience. Unlike in 2016, when we had an energy and sustainability fair in late October in the community center, we're not involved in any major projects this past year, no major accomplishments to report on. We had problems between about March and September getting a quorum, in part because members were having either work-related or personal health or family issues that came up at meeting times. Also, we had a vacancy that I let go on too long because I didn't officially report it in the correct way. So we have then we're entitled to 5 members. We have 4 official, and Barry is pending. During the past year, we submitted a proposal to you to change the charge and the title of the committee so that it was focused on energy issues, and you approved of that. We have been exploring the economics of electric and hybrid vehicles as replacement for administrative vehicles, in particular those old huge cruisers that are out there in the backyard. And some of our neighboring communities have done so, and it very much depends upon the state and federal subsidies continuing to be in place to make it pay off. Primarily, we've been getting acquainted with the Green Communities Program, what the criteria are for being accepted. At our September meeting, which I'm pleased that Ms. Kavanaugh and Ms. Greenhall were able to attend, we met with Seth Pickering, who is the Southeast Regional Coordinator within the Department of Energy for the Green Communities Program, and he will be here on your agenda next week to answer questions, make a brief presentation. In connection with that, I attended a couple of classes on the Mass Energy Insight program, which is software that would be used for establishing a database of our current energy usage. And I would add that when I was a selectman and Green Communities first came along in about 2009 and 10, at that time the board was very concerned about the stretch code. And what I can report without going into detail, but that Mr. Pickering can answer any questions you have about, is that the gap between the stretch code and the standard code has narrowed considerably, and it really only applies to a limited segment of construction anyway. As I say, Mr. Pickering will be prepared to go into detail about that if you have questions. I would just note that in the board's budget message, your point Roman numeral 5 talks about surveying all the town facilities and buildings, and just remind you that during the summer of 2016, the Peregrine consulting firm, paid for by the Cape Light Compact, went around to all of our facilities with Sean Libby and submitted a report as of August last year with the focus on improvements in structure or in systems focusing on energy. But if a system needs to be replaced because it's old and inefficient for reasons other than just energy, the itemization in that report might be a good place to start from or to build on. The only other thing I want to mention is, as I went into some detail in the report, I spent a little time this past year with consumers that had problems with understanding their electric bills, or in the case of a gas customer, not understanding how come when she came down here on a Friday night in March, there was no gas going into her house. And I think Ms. Kavanaugh has emphasized to us at our last meeting that there are consumers who are confused about competitive supply in the electricity market. And just as a reminder, when deregulation went into effect and the Cape Light Compact was created as a municipal aggregator, all of the residential and small business customers on the Cape were transferred to the Cape Light Compact. They've always had the option to opt out. There was no place else to go for a long time except Eversource's standard offer service, okay? There are now at least 3 other competitors from out of state that are offering electricity retail, and customers can leave the Cape Light Compact at no charge and sign a contract with a competitive supplier. But it's important that they understand what the terms and conditions are, because if they should want to leave when they see a better price somewhere else, there's usually a charge for getting out before the expiration of the contract. And if they don't renew, it may not, they may have to do something to keep from being automatically renewed. So we stand ready to help consumers. I think one of the things that people don't understand is that both the Cape Light Compact and Eversource go to the wholesale market twice a year, every 6 months, and see where they can get the best price. And if it's not the same supplier that they had previously, something shows up on customers' bills saying, you've changed your supplier, and so we're going to start billing you for the new supplier. And the customers say, I didn't change supplier. And so they really have to study bills to understand what's happening. And we stand ready to try to explain. I think possibly if next January, when the Cape Light Compact announces what its charges rates are going to be for the next 6 months, that might be a good time to go to Channel 18 and just review it for folks. Other than that, I have to check with Link Hooper and see whether National Grid has been relaying any mains in town if this year, because what they did last year was they ran the 2-inch lines down the street and in the fall until it got to be too cold to do that, and then came back on the 15th of March and started reconnecting homes, okay? And that means turning the power off, and then there has to be somebody in the home for the agent, the worker to come back in and turn things on again. And in the case of seasonal folks, they're not here when it's happening. So I don't know whether I haven't seen any of it around town this year. There's been a lot of utility work, but I haven't seen 2-inch lines being raised. But Link will know. He has good contact with them because they were doing some larger main work. So that's all I have. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Larry. Questions, Don?
No question, just thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Janelle?
I'm all set, Larry, thank you.
Julie?
Did you want to mention anything on the National Grid issue where they're trying to not allow people to make any decisions for their suppliers?
The moratorium on new connections.
Well, we have the moratorium on new connections, but
Yep.
then we also have that National Grid is trying to tell others that they.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, misunderstood. I don't think there's been a decision on that. I haven't heard it. Just to review, both National Grid and the Cape Light Compact have state-approved energy efficiency programs, and National Grid has petitioned the Department of Public Utilities claiming that its customers should have to get all of their energy efficiency services from them, whether it's for heating or otherwise. And the compact is objecting to that, and I don't think it's been decided.
I just want to say thank you, Larry, and the whole town is going to miss you when Larry's decided to move on and at the end of June because he's got a new wonderful opportunity in Weymouth, and I don't know what we're going to do without him.
I'm primarily downsizing my home, but I have a son who lives with me and needs to have access via public transportation to the metropolitan Boston job market. There is a brand new planned community called Union Point being developed on what used to be the South Weymouth Naval Air Station. There's already a senior living facility, and they're going to build another one. And it's supposed to be ready by next fall. I presume it'll be more like the end of the year. I think it will be exciting to be watch someplace being built new from scratch.
Congrats.
But I've actually lived longer in Harwich than anywhere else in my life.
Larry?
Well, I agree. I don't know if we can allow you to go, especially if Barry's not coming back too. We'll lose both of
Well,
them.
the Barry and Larry show has to end sometime.
Thank you.
I had a series of comments and questions about the green communities, the 5 criteria. Larry, you correctly say we debated this some years ago.
Yeah.
And some of those issues for me are still real. But if the fellow's going to be here next week, I'll withhold all those questions
He's
until
here
next week.
I think one of the things you'll be interested in seeing is a presentation showing a map of the 351 communities in the state. and how many of them are already green communities, and a somewhat larger number have adopted the stretch code.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome.
Next up on the new business is review draft management letter for FY16 audit. We do have Carol Capola here for Finance Director.
Hi, good evening.
Good
Carol
evening, Carol.
Capola, Director of Finance. I wanted to review the management letter that's in draft form, but before I did that, I thought it would be to give you a glimpse of where the audit results were. We are working on trying to get the audit firm that completed this audit here to give you a presentation, but I have not received a response yet, so I just wanted to give you a little glimpse. This would never replace something that they would do. They have a different approach to their presentation, but I just wanted to just maybe talk a little about their standards, what they look for in an audit, in addition to what's the town's responsibilities, and then look at a 5-year trend of where the general fund has come in as actual results, and then move forward to the management letter. So, auditors in the state of Massachusetts, they have to meet certain qualifications in order to be a municipal auditor. They have to be licensed in the state of Massachusetts. They have to have significant experience with municipal audits. Their staff has to be trained appropriately. And then they have a whole bunch of standards that all auditors have to follow. And we have little acronyms for them all, so I try not to use them, and I'm going to try tonight not to use them. So we have auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America, and those are standards that are set for any audit, and they're required to be followed. We have statements on auditing standards that set the tone and the testing that will be completed during any audit. We have the Single Audit Act of 1996, and that is for federal funds. So just like you took in our funding for the Muddy Creek project in FY16, or you expended money for that purpose, anything over $750,000 in expenditures requires that you undertake this special audit, and the federal government requires this. You have governmental auditing standards, or what we usually call the yellow book. So it's a particular auditing standard that has to be met. There's checklists that are provided. So if I'm going in and I'm going to audit cash, let's just say, I have a particular checklist, and I have to look at every one of those items. So that's what you can expect. And then you can expect generally accepted accounting principles, and a lot of people know that as GAAP. You can expect that the financial transactions and the financial records and the statements that are provided to the auditors meet GAAP. So the town of Harwich presented its financial statements to the auditors. They did that in a timely manner. I think you had probably some difficulty in turnover here, but more likely turnover at your auditing firm that caused this delay, and this is a significant delay, right? To be presenting this to you in October, I would expect to be presenting that to you sometime around last December, okay? So go ahead, you can. We have responsibilities at the town of Harwich, and the folks that you task with preparing your financial statements and preparing those financial transactions, it's complicated. Municipal accounting is complicated. It's not like corporate accounting. So we have this like 3-tiered approach. We keep the books on a regular basis, on a budgetary basis. So the way you receive your reports every month, you'll see those are prepared on a budgetary basis. Shows you what expenses did we pay, what money walked in the door. Didn't pay any attention to what liabilities did we incur, what money do we expect to get in, didn't pay attention to that. So at the end of the fiscal year, the finance department is charged with bringing those financial transactions up to what we call generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. and it's the modified basis of accounting. So you record transactions where, well, I got the goods, I received the service, I didn't pay for it yet, but I have it, and I have to record that as a liability. Or people worked, I didn't pay them until July, but they worked in June, and we incurred an expense. We have to record that as well. As well as, well, I expect $1 million coming in from the federal government because we incurred, you know, we worked on Muddy Creek or Saquatucket Harbor, and so we record those as like what we call a receivable. And then we take those financial statements that we've prepared and we hand them to the auditor and we say, and oh, by the way, here's all our capital assets and here's all our depreciation, here's our long-term debt, here's our obligations with OPEB, here's our obligations with pensions, and then the auditors put together your financial statements, the final financial statements, and that is what we would consider them to be full accrual. You can go ahead and. So I put together, I went back to your last 5-year audits that you have completed financial statements. And this is really hard to read. I apologize for that. I guess it's too late. But I can provide it to you in paper copy. But so I went back to 12, went from 12 to 16, and looked at general fund revenues and expenditures. And then I took a look at what is your unassigned fund balance? What was your stabilization funds? And when you look at that, you look at, you know, at how stable is the community, right? Because you really want to see that line trending up, right? And GFOA has a minimum standard, and GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association, and they have best practice standards. And at a very minimum, the community should have 2 months' worth of operating expenses at all times. So what does that mean for Harwich? What did that mean in FY16? Even though it was almost a year and a half ago, what did it mean? Well, it meant 9.8 million or 16.7%. Because I think I've been here before you and said between 15 and 18%. That's where you want your reserve funds to be in case something happens. So I thought I would provide that information for you. You can skip to the next one. So there's all different types of audit opinions. There's what we call a disclaimer of opinion. That's when the auditors say, you know, I didn't have the financial information, the records weren't provided to me, I couldn't do the audit. You could have an adverse opinion, which is the very worst. And that means there's material misstatements that are in the financial statements and they've been presented as such, and that's whether they're by errors or fraud. You can have a qualified opinion that say, well, the financial statements don't really, we didn't bring them up to GAAP standards or generally accepted accounting principle standards. However, it's not as bad as an adverse opinion, meaning there wasn't intentionally material misleading. And then there's an unqualified opinion. Unqualified opinion just says, we reviewed everything, the auditors provide an opinion on the financial statements, and we believe that they are free of any misrepresentations. And that is what the town of Harwich received for FY16. So along with the financial statements, the next very important piece of information is your management letter. And a management letter, so you hire an independent source to come in and review our processes and procedures, ask us a whole bunch of questions, look at our internal control documents and policies, and perhaps make some recommendations. There's a couple of different levels of deficiencies that can be noted in a management letter. You could have significant deficiencies or a significant deficiency, and where it affects the daily operations, it affects the financial data in the sense that it may not be correct. You may not be able to rely on it. And then there's material weaknesses. Material weaknesses typically are a combination of significant deficiencies that turn into a material weakness, that say the likelihood that this information is presented to you is correct is minimal. And then there's other, recommendations that they say, hey, we saw that your investment policy hasn't been updated in 4 or 5 years, and we really believe that is in your best interest, or something of that nature. So let's go forward. There are some challenges that the town of Harwich has had for the past few years in some of these management letter comments. Some of them have already been addressed. They've already been rectified, certainly before I came. But a lot of the work, there was work done in FY17. The work will proceed in FY18 to address any material weaknesses we have here. The first one was to correct the cash reconciliation process, and we did, and the town did, you did. Brought in a new cash module, treasurer's cash module, and cash is reconciled every month to the penny. To improve reporting within the general ledger. I worked hard on this summer to move this is just an example, the CPA funds over to their prospective fund. They were all commingled in the general fund, and that had been happening for quite a while. And then enhancement of internal controls over financial reporting. So there's some policies or procedures that really are important to document here. And I think once we do that, we train folks on proper internal control and why they're so important, that I think we'll be able to remove this comment here. And then there's some other comments. There's other suggestions to separate water, OPEB and pension liabilities, which we're working on. To update capital assets, which we made significant progress this year in updating capital assets. Unfortunately, there were assets that were on that list for buildings that no longer exist, or when they were being depreciated still, or things of that nature. There was a comment to remove performance bonds from the general fund. That has been done. And then we're working on this winter recovery road program, which honestly I haven't dug deep enough into it. I don't know where we are, but I will work on that as well. And then there's a recommendation that more folks are involved in approving journal entries, and that monthly financial reporting is documented, which we do now, and is returned to the finance office. So I think, sorry. I think you've come a long way. I think that you've made a lot of progress in the past year, and you'll continue to make progress. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Carol. Larry?
Thank you, Carol. I had a series of questions, which I think you've answered them, but part of the, to reconcile the books you mentioned, that was a question. The controls. The item that may be related to each of these questions is how user-friendly and usable Munis is. I know I've been critical of that in the past, and I read in here that they've asked for another update. Does Munis meet your requirements as updated, or how's that stand?
So I think that maybe I might be able to answer your questions in a different way, maybe. Foster and I are in the process of setting up training for folks that work and use Munis on a regular basis, or it could be anyone. We're going to address all the deficiencies in people's ability or lack of knowledge to pull information out of this software. I have no problem with using Munis. It's like every other financial software package that I use. I don't find it difficult, but I can understand that other people might.
Okay. It also mentions in the report the idea of a risk assessment
Yes.
and the possibility of forming a committee to do that, to help that out. Is that, I hate to point at Jack, but is that something that, and Mark, is that something that should be, that FinCom should be looking at, or is that a separate activity?
Well, I think that you can certainly have the Department of Revenue come in and do a risk assessment for you. I don't know how backed up they are, but I know that they've been doing them before in the past. It is something that could certainly involve the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen. But this is the Board of Selectmen's audit. So this is your check and balance.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Julie?
Thank you, Carol. That's a lot of great information. I'm trying to weave my way through the report. And to Larry's point, that was one of my questions is, are we going to be looking to create some type of new risk assessment program? And it seems like maybe that's something we need to work on or involve DOR. And did you say that, there's documentation now in terms of the attestation of the receipts and reconciliation of accounts. Did you say that there's also an additional approval process for like journal accountability? Is that going on now?
So I had just met with Foster last week because unfortunately folks outside the finance office have been allowed to post journal entries, which is really an internal control weakness.
Okay.
So I met with Foster last week and, asked that those permissions be removed and that everything now is going to come right through the finance office. So we're going to have workflows put together, which we call workflows, in the accounting system. So a clerk can enter a journal entry, it goes to her boss for approval. It comes to, the assistant town accountant for approval, and then it comes to me.
Okay, great, thank you. I do have a couple other questions. Just in terms of the remedies that have been done, so for instance, the Muddy Creek overpayment, based on the revisions that have been made, would that not happen again now? Would we?
So we were working on putting together reestablishing the purchase order module in Munis and came into a snag. So that is on our agenda to get to complete within the next 30 days. I actually have tasked the assistant town accountant with finding out exactly what steps we need to do to reset up that module, because I did issue a purchase order. It's just that it's not on the right form. It doesn't have the most appropriate person's signature. It doesn't have a signature on it, and it's just not set up properly any longer.
Okay.
But once that's completed, yes, that will address that issue.
Okay. And we learned about that because of the audit, or did we learn about that internally prior to?
We knew internally.
Okay.
So I mean, that's kind of, it happened. The mistake happened.
Okay.
But it was identified quickly.
Okay. I think that's really the bulk of my questions, except for you mentioned the OPEB, and I didn't see how they noted that if we are not looking at the liabilities and that it will, do we have any idea how that's affected our overall balance sheet? in
So
terms-
OPEB and your pension liability, so if you, I don't know if you have your audit in front of you, do you?
I haven't, no, I don't have the full audit.
Well, so your government-wide financial statements are the most broadest financial statements, right? And those show your OPEB liability and your pension liability, along with your capital assets and your long-term debt. So it does negatively affect, because it's a liability, right?
Right.
So it's a credit on that balance sheet, meaning it reduces I'm happy to give you the number. It's a large number.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have an opportunity, I guess, to weigh in on a couple of these things. One of the things and I will definitely get to that, on the cash flow. My first month on the job, the cash reconciliation was an issue. And I met with the finance team, and we put that, a process into place to address that, and that's been addressed. And then we actually went out and got software to make it even better. So, the real value in doing an audit is to have somebody come from the outside and look and say, this is what you do okay, this is what you can do better, and to try to do better. I am disappointed that we had the finding on Muddy Creek. But, you know, one thing that's always interesting is, you know, you have to look at things in the context of time. And the reality is, the Muddy Creek project went where Harwich appropriated 50% of the money, Chatham appropriated 50% of the money, and then we actually paid each bill at 50%. When we got the almost $5 million worth of grants, it all went to the town of Harwich, was the grant administrator. So then we paid everything, and then when the grants ran out, we went back to the 50-50 rule. So you're talking about coordination between two towns on one project, and as it was pointed out, I mean, it was found. I mean, it's disappointing to me that we didn't find it at our level, that it went to the contractor, and the contractor said, look, we've been paid too much, there's something wrong. But when you go through different accountants, you know, I think at that point we had a void in the accounting. It's not unusual that some mistakes could be made. Again, I was ultimately involved in that project, and I want to make sure, especially in the community, that I look at things from a budget perspective, make sure that we balance things from a budget perspective. And things were balanced from a budget perspective. How quickly we get the payments in and the timing of those payments, you know, that is an issue that really is kind of in the realm of the auditing and accounting world. And I'm not saying, I don't think anything was done wrong, it's just timing-wise, I'm not sure that the timing is quite right. In that, it was an overpayment. I will dig into that because I'm curious if that was in the 50-50 stage where we switched back to the 50-50. So we'll look at that. So operationally, when we do another project, we'll put additional checks and balances in. I do think, to Carol's point, and you know, since I've been here, in other towns that I've been in, we have Munis, which is really, it's an accounting software that does good things. It's terrible for budgeting. I'm not a big fan because it's not friendly from a budgeting perspective. But for an accounting and auditing perspective, you know, I think it serves a good purpose. There are literally items in there that you flip the switch. We've already paid for the feature, requisitions and purchase orders, that the town's never adopted. So it's not the first town I've been in where we've had this issue. It certainly helps to catch things, and certainly I've worked with Carol, and I appreciate Carol's efforts a lot in terms of this, that she's trying to take us and move us in even a better situation. On the last component you had mentioned about when we do the OPEB liability and the pension liability, we actually are part of a consortium that we go through the county. The county acquires through Siegel, is the actuarial firm that looks at the liability. I had a gentleman from Siegel call me, and I said, you know, we have a water enterprise account. Why aren't you guys breaking out that piece so we can then take not just a gross number for the town of Harwich, but break it up so the water department has theirs? The trouble is, they do that audit once every 2 years. So they only introduced the idea, I think it was probably 4 years ago at this stage, that I had that conversation with them, and I said, can you please break it out for communities that do have enterprise funds for their water department, so we can then track that number and put together a financial plan. So 2 years, I guess 2 years ago, they were made aware of it, so they started to look at it. And I think this year will be the first year that it's fully segmented off, and now we actually have a planning number. So if there's a $40 million liability, $4 million of it may be the water department that would have to be funded through the enterprise fund. So in terms of, I think a lot of towns, particularly on the Cape, we do things collaboratively, which is good. But sometimes it also means that it takes a little bit longer to get things done because we have different issues than Chatham or Brewster. But I just want, these are things that have been evolving and improving as they've been evolving.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Janelle?
I don't have anything.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question, Carol. I mean, you alluded kind of quickly in the presentation to the fact that the CPC money was commingled in general funds. Was there a period of time, like for reporting purposes, that actually was causing us to exaggerate our reserve position, or was it just the money was sitting there?
So there's a financial transaction that happens for articles with balances. So let's say your original appropriation was $100,000 and we spent $50,000, and so we have a $50,000 dollar amount remaining. We do a financial transaction that reserves that $50,000, so it would never have been reported in your unassigned fund balance.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for all the information. So, Chris is correct. This is you are correct. This is a selectman's audit. So I was a little disheartened to see the amount, there's a page and a half of prior year recommendations. I was a little disheartened to see how much we haven't done, and I certainly recognize that you're new and that you're fixing it, and appreciate Chris's comments. I guess mistakes happen. The mistake in question for me that really stands out is $325,000. How does that even happen? There's an invoice number attached, I would imagine, to every bill.
So
Do
I
we
ca-
have an idea, I guess?
I do. I spoke to the engineer, the town engineer, about it in depth. And so the contractor billed, so they do some progress billing, right? And it's your typical construction contract. And so they billed a dollar amount for services performed. The town had hired someone to oversee and approve of those invoices that are presented. That contractor missed it, and it came to the town engineer. He saw the sign off, and the bill got processed. I do believe that if you had a more stringent review process of a purchase order system, and someone it's not the fault of the engineer, it's the fault of the finance department, honestly.
So,
So it was a payment for Chatham and Harwich, and and so the total amount was $650,000.
so I don't want to dive into all of what's in here, because I do appreciate what Chris said that, and your comments about what we are doing. Number 4, on the actions and deliverables, under goal number 1, objective 3, a B for the Board of Selectmen, is annual auditor's report document. It basically is a memo from you to the Board of Selectmen, along with the town administrator, to come up with a memo to us of what the audit report says and how we're going to fix it. Now, since I've been on the board, I think it's 2.5 years, we've never done that. So we as a board have never reviewed the auditor's report or gotten from administration a list of what we need to fix. And I did call some other towns today to find out how they did their process. And I think you alluded to me in our last conversation that in other towns you work for, there's policies that get put into place after an auditor's report. So I guess what I'm looking for, Chris, is action number 4 under actions and deliverables, goal number 1, objective B, that memo, that report, how we're going to fix what's in this report. It does mention in that we'll go back 3 years and do it for 3 years. So in my mind, we have 2 years here. This is the most important to me at this point, is getting something in place so the Board of Selectmen can either have a policy or a procedure to get these things fixed in a more timely manner. Because however that mistake happened, we have to do everything we can do to make sure it never happens again. Chris?
Yeah, just, Mr. Chairman, I guess I do take a little offense that, to my knowledge, we provide the audit every year to the board. So there's never been an intent by administration to hide any of this stuff. So certainly that material is in.
Let me stop you there. Audit 14 and 15, I requested last year for almost 3 months, and we finally did get them. I'm not saying administration hides them. It wasn't forthcoming. We had this conversation. If you want to go back to that, we can revisit it through tapes or minutes. So I'm not saying you hit it. I'm saying this is what we want. It's in the goals and objectives. And to me, this is extremely serious. Almost every point in here is extremely serious. Go ahead.
If I'm allowed. So, Mr. Chairman, one of the things, as you see up here, and this is actually a good slide, they bring up different issues, and you see that things are in process or things have been completed. So the fact that, we had a discussion or didn't have a discussion, like with the cash reconciliation, you know, that was something that we knew was a problem right when I started, and we put implementation into place through administration and finance to you know, remedy that. We put money into the budget to get the module to improve it. I have no problem. We can do a work list. I think you've referenced in the past that you looked at the approach I took in Southbridge. And Southbridge, due to other financial considerations, I had to make sure that we had action plans on all these items. So we can go through and identify these items and highlight, and items that are gonna take, you know, financial resources, we'll put it into the capital plan and we'll, you know, get to it. Because some of these things are best practices and not necessarily things that are material.
And I did thank you for that, and thank Carol for that as well, everything that's been up to date. But what I would like to see is this memo created on what the audit report says and how we're gonna fix it, for the public, you know, not just for us. Anything further on that, Don? Is that Larry?
Yeah.
Julie, all
Good,
set?
thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, approve and authorize chair to sign DHCD regulatory agreement for Habitat for Humanity 93 and 97 Route 28 project. So we have two board members, I believe, that are going to recuse themselves tonight. So I would ask that you sit in the audience.
At least explain why.
You can explain why.
Going to recuse myself. I am going to sit in the audience because I was a participant. Hesh sold the property to Habitat. If you have a material question, I may be in a position to answer it, but I am not going to be involved in any kind of discussion because there is a clear fiduciary conflict.
And Janelle is also going to recuse herself when she gets back. Vicki, would you like to give us an overview?
So this project at 9397 has been much discussed in the town, come before different boards at different periods, and I just checked it. It was subject of actually 8 hearings over a 5-month period with the Zoning Board of Appeals. So I'm going to jump right to the conclusion and then take any questions that you might have. It has been given the approval by the Zoning Board of Appeals for the 40B comprehensive permit for this project. The appeal period has expired with no appeals. And so now it's at the stage when the regulatory agreement is voted approval and signed. That goes up, and DHCD also signs that. It goes on record. And the regulatory agreement then provides extra assurance that everything that the Zoning Board of Appeals gave as a condition to this project will be enforced. So essentially, the final project, as it emerged from the Zoning Board of Appeals with the various conditions, allows for the following. On this parcel of land where there had been the Chase home, which some very vocal community members with various people, maybe not unanimously, but certainly there was an expressed interest in maintaining that as historic. The Chase home with a barn behind it, and then an adjoining, on the adjoining lot, a ranch home. And then there's subdivided off from that property in back, as was originally proposed. Habitat will be developing 6 affordable homeownership homes built under the Habitat for Humanity program, which you are all very familiar with from previous programs, the sweat equity, the volunteerism. So there'll be 2 2-bedroom ranches, 2 3-bedroom ranch homes, and 2 3-bedroom Cape-style homes, 4 3-bedrooms, 2 2-bedrooms, and with the approval of DHCD, after we document local need, up to 70% may be awarded with a preference for people living, working, or attending school in the town of Harwich. That back parcel of land, we were previously awarded a grant conditional on the Zoning Board of Appeals approval of $240,000 in Harwich trust funds, and the approval of ZBA allows us to go forward with that purchase. On the front parcel, through the conditions of the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Chase home will, the front parcel, part of the parcel will be the parcel that Hetch is free to sell to a private party. It's considered the market rate portion of this. Within the Chase home, the use of 3 apartments was allowed through the Zoning Board of Appeals approval. And further, the Chase home needs to have the exterior restricted with a historic appearance. The barn now is allowed to have a use of 1 apartment in it, and the exterior needs to be restricted with an historic appearance.
Are you going to recuse yourself? Habitat.
Do I need to?
Yeah, you did last time, that's the only reason I'm asking.
So,
I think I need to.
okay. And for the ranch home, which currently has 2 rental apartments in it, that use has been continued, and the side of it is going to kind of be cut off and put on the back so that a driveway through to the back can be constructed. Additionally, the zoning board set some landscaping standards, I think, to kind of soften the appearance, so that as you drive by, you're essentially seeing what's there now, and a little bit softening of any visual to the back, where quite ordinary contemporary ranches and capes will be. So you'll more see the Chase home as you drive by. And so in effect, I think it's very much the proposal we discussed. It certainly evolved over that period of time in the many, many discussions and pushes and pulls. But the town funds will, in essence, allow us to purchase the back portion. And there's, I think from there, I better take any questions that there might be.
Sure.
That'll be simpler.
Let's start there. Larry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Thank you, Vicki. I only have 2 questions. The first one is, I noticed in, I guess it's paragraph 5, doesn't matter, that we can have a local option, not a local option, but a local preference, so that first choice comes from the surrounding, our community and surrounding. To do that, you need a marketing plan according to your document. What's your thoughts? Do we have that capability of having a local preference, and do you have a marketing plan that would make that happen?
Well, we always have to submit a marketing plan. In the time I've been with Habitat for 19 years, I've never had DHCD reject our request to have local preference, but indeed the town is really supposed to actively assist us in making that presentation. So usually in requesting the local preference, we go to studies and demographics that the town has collected. We reference those studies. We make the case that there is a local need for affordable homes, and we would have done that as recently as Oak Street, so it would have been approved back then, so I doubt too much has been changed. I would be shocked if we're not able to demonstrate the local need for local preference.
So is that a decision we have to make then? We have to vote on a local preference to request that be done, or what's the next step?
It's probably already in the
marketing?
we would have presented that we were planning to do that, but if you want to,
Well, maybe you could
I
just
don't so
give
much
me-
want to speak to that.
I
If you
haven't
want to
seen it.
affirm that that's the desire of
You
the
can affirm
board,
that
certainly.
they have a marketing plan. Maybe it's already in place, so we don't need it. Maybe you can clarify that as we go forward. In other
So
words,
we
my
have-
question is,
as
do we
part
have
of
a-
As part of the application to DHCD
So
initially.
if this were built now,
Yeah.
the preference would be made, there'd be a local preference in the document now, or no?
So, in advance of actually opening applications, although we've previously submitted a sample marketing plan, in advance of opening the applications, I just went through this for a project in Marston's Mills. We literally have to submit to DHCD every piece of marketing, information, the application, everything for DHCD approval. In advance of doing that, we send up our demonstration of local need, and as I say, for the past 19 years, every single time they have approved that demonstration of local need, which then allows us to give local preference. So that would be quite routine that we will be doing that.
Okay, so the answer is then going forward, there would be a local preference.
Yes, DHCD does have to give the nod. We do have to demonstrate it. I'm just,
Okay,
They've-
and you've made that step to demonstrate it? I'm trying to get to the end here, because, you know, we're contributing money from the town.
right.
For me, I'd like to give the town first option, first preference.
So Larry's looking for an assurance from Habitat that we are going to have local preference in that 70% range on this project.
I guess kind of a yes or no answer would be my preference.
Just maybe I'll try to help her. I mean, just reading through under the Board of Appeals, which is a condition requirement under affordability, section B, B3, it specifically says no more than 70% of the units shall be reserved for current residents of the town of Harwich, municipal employees of the town of Harwich, employees of businesses located in the town of Harwich, and households with children attending Harwich schools, and a lottery to accomplish that effect.
So I get that.
It's contractual.
Well, it is, it's no more than 70%. So I guess what Larry's
But-
looking for is, are we getting up to 70%?
I
How
have
do we
to
make
say, I consider it a formality. It's something that's routinely done, but technically, Habitat submits something when we're getting ready to open applications. So you're looking for an assurance that I can't
Well,
1,000% give you tonight. I can tell you I've done it 50 times since
in
I've,
your sense is
and
that
every
will-
single
that-
time
in
it's
your-
approved,
okay.
because if you have confidence that there is a local need for family housing in Harwich, then I think you can feel 100% assured that that will be approved. I think the demographics that were even talked about with the school tonight, it is impossible that we will not be able to demonstrate this.
Yeah, I'm confident.
So I'm
there's a
giving you
need.
the assurance.
Okay.
Thank you.
A second question. And I'm sure this has been answered in other forums, maybe even here, but
Okay?
I think a lot of the discussion going forward, since you have basically going back and forth was Hack and Hetch, you know, and splitting out the two front. Who controls the entire site to be sure the entire site looks good? And is it a split responsibility of the front buildings by one organization and the back buildings by the other?
Sure. You know, in the end, and that's the reason why there needs to be site control of the whole thing at the time it goes through the zoning board of appeals, because then any decision of the zoning board of appeals is then binding on every lot. So as homes are conveyed, every homeowner or the owner of those other parcels are bound by the decision of the zoning board of appeals. There will also be a homeowners association there that will, some of the conditions govern all of it. In the end, any zoning regulation has different enforcers, so some of those would be enforced actually by the building inspector if there were a violation, so the whole thing is, every parcel as it's conveyed to different owners over generations will be governed by the decisions of the zoning board.
And is that your responsibility then, or
No,
to
because
keep
it's-
track of that, or?
Not really, because it's not rental housing, it's home ownership housing. So if certain landscaping is required on a certain lot, that becomes that lot owner's responsibility, and it's a violation of the decision if that's violated. Some of the things, a number of things were put as part of the,
Of the condition from the ZBA?
also part of the homeowners association. So in those instances, there will be contracted with a property management firm that will assist in enforcement. But, for example, if someone started to build something 5 feet away from the boundary, that was not part of the conditions, that becomes a violation that's enforceable by your building commissioner.
Yeah,
So it
yeah.
depends.
I understand that. I guess I was hoping there would still be some overall management of the, yeah, but you're saying that's going to be transferred to the owners association?
Well, some of it, in any conditions of a zoning board, it passes with the land and with the lot, so that's the real answer.
Okay.
Unless
Thank you.
it's subject to the homeowners association, and then there will be trustees, and we also require before it's turned over to the original trustees, we have already contracted with a property management firm, so they have assistance in enforcing. So that's about what we can do over and above.
Julie?
First of all, congrats, it's a great project. And I'm just, so I know that the 6 lots in the back are Habitat, and then the 2 lots in the front are Hetch. Now, when will they, so they're all taken on by Habitat, and then the 2 in the front transfer to Hetch? Has that already occurred?
No, so we will close, really the last 2 steps before we can close on the purchase are the signing of the regulatory agreement, and there's a ConsCon meeting next week, I believe, and that satisfies the final contingencies in this, which should give us access, I hope, of the funds that were voted by the Affordable Housing Fund. We go to closing. Habitat, in fact, purchases the whole lot and then conveys the front to Hetch. And that's how we accomplished having site control as we marched through the whole process. And it still achieves the effect of the town funds, in effect, being used to purchase the back and Hetch to be able to go ahead and market those front units.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Janelle?
I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Janelle.
Chris, is the 240,000 available? I know last year when we voted this, it wasn't quite there, but we were.
Yeah, I'll have to look into the number.
Okay.
I'll track that down.
That's one. Number two, you had mentioned in the series of emails that you were applying for a CPC application.
Right,
To what amount?
for $300,000 for $50,000 per unit.
And what if you don't get that?
I would say it will significantly delay the project until we can raise a similar amount of scratch.
Okay. So this process is an interesting process, and bear with me. You and I talked last week about this, and I did some research. The 40B part of this and the allowing of the splitting of the properties. So when you came before us and presented, I remember it was a very long debate. It went on and on and on, and Peter Hughes finally made a motion to give you $35,000 to plan, and you were going to come back to us. During that presentation, you were asking for 4 to 6 units. Part of the ranch home was going to be, most likely be removed because of a driveway access, and the barn was also in question about being able to be there or not. Now you're before us with the Grand Slam. So we've got the barn, we've got the house, we've got the ranch. We're taking the section off the ranch and rebuilding it behind it, and we're getting 6 homes behind it. Now, I'm a huge fan of Habitat and home ownership. I think this is a great program. Where I'm confused and where I get lost is the splitting of the property. And I guess this is a regulation question, Chris, because now if I'm reading it correctly, we've effectively split the lot, sold the back half to Habitat, and now we're taking the front 2 properties and we're allowing for 3 rental units in one, 2 rental units in the other, 1 rental unit in the barn. This isn't Habitat, so this will be Hetch, at market rate. So they're no longer affordable units, which Hetch had in there as affordable units. Now they're market rate units, and no requirement for there to be, no requirement for them to be affordable. And in at least some of the correspondence I read, they weren't permitted apartments to begin with. So by doing this, we're actually granting them permission to sell these as apartments. Is that fair? Can anyone answer that?
I would just like to qualify a little bit in the sense that, I mean, Hetch, because of their mission, rented them as at prices or under conditions that they considered affordable, but in the sense of affordability that is insured through some kind of restriction, I don't believe those were ever actually affordable in that sense, that they were insured, you know, to be affordable in the future. So I guess that's a minor technicality. In terms of the use, it's simply, and this was something, and the reason we brought in an additional attorney during the hearings was not to outgun the ZBA with attorneys, so to speak. What the zoning board was asking so many sort of deep technical questions that spoke to 40B case law, honestly, that we brought in a 40B expert so that we could answer those questions during the zoning board hearings. And indeed, Paul Haverty is an attorney that often serves towns so that they can properly go through a 40B process with major developers. And he certainly confirmed on the public record that doing this as essentially what it comes down to is a 50-50 project, 50% affordable, the habitat units, 50% quote market rate in front of six units, and establishing that use as part of the 40B process was completely legitimate. And we really feel it's legitimate. I think the barn got lost in the discussion, quite frankly. I looked back in the record too, and I feel that there was a lack of explicitness in the discussion along the way on that. And I would acknowledge that there was plenty of discussion in the public arena during the 40B hearings when the corrected project eligibility letter came back from DHCD. It was explicit, to Habitat and to the Board of Selectmen. I totally agree with you that it's, in conversation and discussion, it's always so important to, for each party to consider, what haven't we highlighted before? What haven't we really dug into? And I think there was, obscurity is not the word I'm looking for. I mean, I think there was always, the discussion was open, it was alive, and I think the barn got a little lost in there, and it was quite explicit as we entered that 40B process, but I think it was not, so much along the way.
So I do understand the law part of this, but I guess where my question still lies is, we are now creating, on that front lot, I believe this is a 2.3 acre site, we're now creating 6 rental units, market rate, and behind it, we're creating the 6 affordable habitat homes, correct?
That's true. And if I might say one more thing, though, the trend, having recently attended a presentation by Cape Cod Commission housing specialists, representatives from Mass Housing Partnership, et cetera, the trend to try to create more housing in towns would speak to this sort of multi-unit form that actually is in the front. So in some ways, it's serving the town very well to have preserved those apartments and then have some affordable home ownership homes. So I would present to you that the public good is well served by this.
Thank you, Vicki. So I guess, Chris, regulatory-wise, and Richard Waystack wants to make a comment. Are we okay with that? Is the permitting, we're essentially permitting 3 rentals and rental units in one building, 2 in another, and 1 in a barn that aren't currently permitted as rental units by splitting this project the way we are.
Yeah, I don't know if,
Well, I mean, I think the fact that, you've got the back lots that are being, affordable units, and then you're creating an increased density in the front portion, but there's a offset by having affordable and a 40B, more than likely, within the ability to increase the density in the front. And the ZBA wouldn't have allowed it if it was against any bylaw, without the
Right.
ability to have the 40B, I would think.
yeah, I do think, and this is certainly an area where, this is not my specialty, but I think where what you heard was that they came in for the entire site to have all the units considered. So to your point, Mr. Chairman, they went through the regulatory process. Now the regulatory process has laid out their list of conditions that they've put on there. And what's being asked is really for this to become a restrictive covenants on the site and the development. And you've had the process been laid out to you that by having one entity receive the permission to go ahead under the 40B, which 40B basically exempts out elements of zoning to lay out a structure. And then as those components get sold off, so ideally those 6 units get sold, The conditions stay with those units. The homeowners association would be responsible for the common area. And then the Hetch property, the two buildings, would continue to be, and this I guess I'm a little bit fuzzy on whether Hetch is going to retain ownership of those two and what the plan is for Hetch moving forward. Is it to stay within their mission, or they've sold that to
Excuse me, Hetch
some other entity?
was open throughout. Hetch has always wished to sell this property. That's almost where this story began. So they did identify a intended purchaser along the way, and now the use is both, part of also what the zoning board did is they restricted those two front lots in a commercial area to a residential use. So they're restricted to a residential use, restricted for two of the three buildings to have a historic exterior, and an allowable use for the 3 apartments that currently exist, the 2 in the other house, and with new construction in the barn, which means as any time the construction will trigger town permits or inspections, they will have to meet, whether it's state sanitary code for rentals or building code for new construction, septic code, all of those things will have to be met. It's just the density and the use that were approved through the 40B process.
Richard?
Briefly, Mr. Chairman, Richard Waystack. I'm an advocate for housing, and I've been following this process since it began. Just a couple clarifications. The Hetch ownership of the buildings, as people know, they initially wanted everything to go down. It would have increased the units for sale under Habitat. But the neighborhood and neighbors and townspeople came out and wanted to preserve those buildings. One of the misconceptions that Habitat bought those with tenants in place. They've been market rate that, again, they're not deed restricted for affordable. Hetch bought them, I'm sorry. Hetch bought them, and they were not deed restricted for affordable. I'm a landlord. I have a number of rentals in the area. Some are affordable, some are market rate. And right now, there's such a huge need for both market rate and affordables. I would have loved to have seen this project, both of those buildings down. We would have had, hopefully 10 to 12 Habitat homes there. But I think both the proponents of Habitat and Hetch tried to appease the owners of the area, the neighbors who were there, to try to keep that Jediah Chase property in place with a deed restriction or a historical preservation on it. It's not the best, but it's arrived where we are today, where we're going to get these 6 new homes there. We're going to keep 6 rentals in the area that are sorely needed. Again, just a clarification, they were not deed restricted by Hetch as affordable, and whether they're market rate or affordable, the rentals are in dire need in this community.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, sir.
Just one other comment. I think it was mentioned in the ZBA document, but it said in keeping with our housing production plan of trying to reach a 10% goal on housing, that this project was going to work towards that. And I would argue that 6 market rate and 6 affordable is a wash. Doesn't do anything for our 10%. Is that fair? So we're creating new market rates.
Well, they were already market rates. That's what I'm saying. That's where the technicality is. In the world of affordable housing, they were already market rates. I don't know how Hetch, I don't know their terms, and I don't think it's subject to this meeting. Maybe they were market rents, but they had a rental assistance voucher. Maybe they just rented with a nice rent. The new owner landlord might also rent with a nice rent, So nothing was lost and 6 are gained.
Thank you, Vicki. Art?
Mr. Chair, Art Bowden, Housing Chair. Just one clarification. Those 6 rental units that we're wrestling with, they were never on the housing production plan as affordable that would go against our housing inventory.
I didn't say they were. I said the opposite.
Okay. So we're not losing any affordable housing.
No, we're not gaining any either, though, because if you're creating market units the same amount as you're creating affordable, it's a wash.
Well, we don't know if we're creating, we don't know what we're actually doing. We know we're going to have 6 apartments there, but we don't know where they're going to go.
I do.
And as Mr. Waystack pointed out very well, we need apartments in town, whether affordable or market rate.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Can I, Larry?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve and authorize the chair to sign the DHCD regulatory agreement for Habitat for Humanity's 93-97 Route 28 project.
I second that.
Okay, any discussion? The only discussion I would have is I'd like this a 40-page legal document, and I did read it twice, and I still have some questions, and I'm not a lawyer, and this is why I've been pushing towards in-house counsel, but Chris, can we at least have another set of eyes on this before I sign it?
Sure.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, next up, discussion on administration, hiring process, and Board of Selectmen confirmation. This is, I'm going to start with Don on this since he requested,
Yeah,
unless you
I'm,
want to give an overview.
I'm not sure where we're going. I just saw the title, so.
Don, this is your agenda item. This is what we discussed last week. So, discussion on administration, hiring process, and Board of Selectmen confirmation. As discussed last week, I told you I would put this back on the agenda.
Thank you.
Here we are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The concern that I had, and it manifested last week, prior to that meeting, there was someone getting appointed out of the, two people getting appointed out of the Highways, Department of Public Works. And that's where I thought we were heading in general. There was transparency about who the finalists were, and what the point systems were, and why, and what the decision-making process was. And that is pertinent because under Section 4 of the Charter, 4-4-1, talks to accept as may otherwise be provided by the general laws, this charter or the personnel bylaws, and subject to the approval of 3 or more affirmative votes of the Board of Selectmen. The town administrator shall have the power to appoint on the basis of merit and fitness alone or remove a division director. So that's the first tier. The second responsibility under the charter is for general employees. And it talks to the ability of the Board of Selectmen with 4 votes to veto a particular appointment within 14 days of the town administrator making the appointment. My comment then is the same as it is now. It is impossible for you to be able to, or any of us, to be able to exercise that with any kind of intelligence if we don't know who else was available as a finalist. I understand the privacy concerns, but they're not, as far as the law is concerned, it shouldn't make any difference because you would be subject in the administrator's office to the same requirements by the press for freedom of information requests that we would, and whatever the exceptions would be that you could quote for whether or not that information could be released would be available to us too, because there are exceptions under the on records requests. It's impossible to be able, this isn't just something that's a selectman's policy, this is in the charter itself. You might as well just yank it out if you have no idea of anybody who applied for the job, including the finalists. As I said, I thought we were heading towards that when the DPW appointments came in, because it was clear who it was getting appointed. It was clear who it was that had also been part of the finalist process. And I have no problem with that. Generally, I have no problem with any of this. This isn't the same as interfering with the management process through the town administrator, because these people aren't actually in the position yet. It's a selection process that's actually codified in the charter itself.
Don, would you mind just giving the example you gave me of past term you served on the board and what?
Yeah, that was actually a department head. It happened to be the DPW director. I mean, he was, at that time, the town administrator was overruled by the then Board of Selectmen because we knew who the 3 finalists were. And we objected to the selection because knowing the 3, we had one person who happens to still be there who had gone through our system, gotten promoted, had gone to get a master's degree in public administration, which showed us that there was a certain amount of incentive on his part to better himself for the betterment of the town, actually, because we got a more fully trained individual. The other person who was getting selected made it clear that he was retiring eventually to the Cape, and this was a bridge for 2 or 3 years where he was going to occupy the job and then buy a house here, retire here, and the person who ultimately got the job was going to be pushed aside to wait for him. But the point is, not him specifically, the point is the charter calls for that kind of a process so that you have the ability to know who it is that was considered. I don't need to know the 21st name, but I find it difficult to be able to address either of these two charter sections if you don't know anything other than the name and the resume of the one person.
Thank you. I'm going to jump right to Chris on this one.
Yeah, number one, Mr. Chairman, I think if we're going to have agenda items that I'm going to be asked to comment on, that I need additional detail. I think that's only fair. In terms of my interpretation of the charter, not just my interpretation of the charter, but what has been asked for from previous administrators, and I think John Giorgio had a write-up, more than happy to provide that, is that it's my understanding that in the positions and the different appointments that are subject to the Board of Selectmen, what the Selectmen have done, they've asked me to conduct the process and then to present the finalists to the board. So whether there's 3 or whether there's 5, we've done that 2 times. In my understanding of the positions that those are eligible for, specifically in the charter, it's the finance director, the police chief, the fire chief, and the administrator. So there's 4 in which the Board of Selectmen is given the authority to do the direct appointment. All the other positions are positions that are the process is done by the administrator, and then what I've seen in other communities that I've been in, and I believe the intent of this charter as well, with the exception, actually, I'll stand corrected on the library. You guys made a determination that all library personnel are done through the library trustees. And then the other exception to that rule is the Water Commission. The Water Commission picks the water superintendent. In terms of the process that we go through internally, and different people, Lynn Cooper does have a little different process that he uses for DPW in the terms of the selection, that administration goes through a process. I've been a professional public administrator for a long time. I believe you bring quality people into the organization and you have those quality people come in. And really, Mr. Chairman, I know you've done this, where if a name comes forward, we provide the resume, we provide the application material, and if someone does not meet the job description requirements that the Board of Selectmen has approved and laid out, then I believe in the confirmation process, it's right for the Board of Selectmen to question that confirmation and to vote it down. It's a check and balance, that's part of it. If the board is asking me, if the majority of the board is asking me to then provide, so if I'm thinking on the last clerical position, if we have 21 people apply, that you want a ranking of all 21, and you want me to submit not one name, but multiple names, I believe that that's contrary to the charter, that you appoint the administrator to administer the personnel program, and if I were to, hire somebody that was incompetent and didn't meet the requirements of the job description, which the check and balance, the Board of Selectmen can do the job description, then you should vote it down and send me back to find another candidate. And I believe this board has actually questioned some of the appointments that have been made. But I believe it's a check and balance, but the requirement is for the administrator to provide one name. I am very concerned that in most cases, we have one position to offer. And contrary, people that apply for a position, their names are not public documents. So the number 2 candidate, the number 3 candidate, those are not public unless you go through the formal process and go through a screening committee and then formally name 3 or 4 people as finalists. And finalists are officially determined to be public information. And on rank and file positions, not the 4 that I alluded to or the other exceptions that I alluded to, that they are deemed to be finalists, and that's why we provide that information to the board. And, you know, we're talking about people's livelihoods, we're talking about people's ability to get jobs, and if we start publishing the top 3 candidates and we only have one job to provide, you know, I think that's gonna have a chilling effect, and quite honestly, it's gonna have some potential legal ramifications that we only have one position to offer.
So I just asked, on the week before last, we had the process for the 2 DPW heavy equipment operators, and what Don is mentioning is that the information was in that, but it wasn't in last week's for the single position. So I guess I'm confused as to why we do it sometimes and why we don't do it other times. Chris?
Well, and actually, Don and I have had this conversation offline, and I had said to him, I have no problem saying what my process is, and that we do hold people to the job descriptions, and we do put those forward. I do have very large exception to if we're gonna start having, instead of 1 name, 3 names. So we did have in the packet, it was in the packet that Charlene did it, that we had 21 people, we selected 6 to interview, the whole 9 yards. And maybe one of the things that we could do is we do keep a score sheet, so we internally have a process, so we could do like Lynn Cooper did and have those scores to give the board some sense for, you know, the candidates that got those. But Link does do a little bit of a different process. He does a skills test. As you can imagine, you have a backhoe and you want someone to see if they can operate the backhoe, so he uses a little different process. We don't do that for all positions, clerical positions and things of that nature.
Thank you, Chris. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to change the discussion, and we're changing it. No one is suggesting that we out the employees and print them for the agenda. We often get things in a confidential packet. We get the Caleb Chase request. We never say who it's going to. I'm just saying, and I'm quite frankly a little offended that you could say that this is us encroaching on any responsibility of the town administrator when I'm sitting here looking at the Harwich Code with the text right in front of me that talks about 3 affirmative votes for the department heads, and it goes down to the rank and file employees with a different process, but it's codified in here. In both instances, it affords the opportunity for the Board of Selectmen to either accept or reject the appointment. And all I'm saying is, on what basis? If we're just going, we just appointed a department head a month ago, and we didn't know anything but the one person, ultimately. Have no idea who else might have applied. Personally, people elect us to be able to have their own representative in the room. The charter is very clear that in the instance of town department heads, that there's an affirmative vote of 3 selectmen, and that in the case of the rank and file, that you can reject an appointment. But how would you do that? On what basis? There's no contrast. You don't have any information other than numbers and a person's name.
So for clarity, Don's position is that if we had the other 2, we narrow this down to 3. Chris picks his pick. We narrow it down to 3. Chris has his pick. We're not changing his pick unless we see something in the other applications.
It goes in a confidential package.
It goes in a confidential package. With that, Larry, I'm going to just open up a new voice.
I'll go with what the board wants on this one.
Thanks.
You're
Julie.
sure about that?
Julie?
Well, I agree in the sense that, I mean, I don't want us to get into any scenario where we're advertising people's names for, you know, rank and file positions. But if we're having it in a confidential packet like we see so many other pieces of information, so that we can at least see the top 3, so that we can make an informed decision when we're voting. And again, more than likely, we're mostly going to support you. It's just that if we're going to be asked, why did you appoint that, why did that person get that job, we want to know that that person was the most qualified of the 3. And I think, you know, what brought us to this discussion, sorry, I don't mean to, I think what brought us to this discussion was a unique situation that arose that isn't always the case, where now we're talking about a family member who's not going to be reporting directly, and very well may be the top candidate, probably is, but it's hard for us as members of the board to say, oh, well, we We just voted on it, but we didn't know anything more. So I think it puts us in a tough spot too. So I don't think that anyone's looking to undermine you. I just want to be clear about that. I just think for me to make a decision, and I'm speaking on a personal note, I would like to be at least able to see the top 3. I don't want to see 21. I don't want to see 5. You know, I just give me a comparison that I know why we're appointing this person as a new employee, and that's what I would be looking for, to be able to justify the decision.
You know?
I agree with what Julie's saying. And also what Dawn's saying, we can't vote against something if we don't know what our options are. So the charter really should have, I think, been a little bit more detailed about how that process should go, and maybe we need to actually put that into the charter. And we could always black out people's names, even in the confidential packet. We don't always have to know their names. We could just have candidate 1, 2, and 3.
You folks are walking a very, very slippery slope, and one that you know, professionally, it's my requirement to say that I think, Mr. Chairman, you know, in your time that you've been on, the point of that language is that I cannot hire someone who is duly incapable of doing the job. That's what the point of that is. The giving out the 3 names, I'll put you in a scenario. You know, you look at the 3 names, I provide that. I've already said unofficially, you know, I'm happy to sit down and say, here's what the applicant pool looked like. But, you know, if you know a person is, you know, plumber X, and someone comes up to you and says, well, why did you pick the first person instead of so-and-so? Are you going to be very careful to make sure that you don't give any illusion in a small town in terms of who that person is? And I've been sued personally. I've been sued personally in this profession 3 times. That's it, 3 times. And one of it was over the exact scenario of someone that didn't get a position that went through a process and sued me personally. So if you want to get into the personnel world, you know, you're in a store and somebody says, and they can put 2 and 2 together, oh, there's only 3 plumbers that are from this area. I just, you know, again, I have no problem kind of sitting down and saying, you know, we'll do like Link did. I don't think Link shared, well, maybe he did share the names of the other candidates, and put the point system in there just to give some sense for the points. But I think we get into dangerous ground, and you get into personal liability when a person that didn't get the position is identified. Quite honestly, I've already had where a person's name got out that was turned down.
Could have been us. We wouldn't have known.
So I'm going to get a legal opinion on this anyway. But the point that I'm going to make is, we hire Chris. We can also fire Chris. So in my sense, I'm putting my faith in the town administrator to deliver forward the most qualified candidate. I would also say that in the one instance that I did look through the application that was there, saw that the minimum job application was not met, sent it back to Chris. It was pulled off the agenda, and he dealt with it. So other than the police chief, fire chief, finance director, and Chris, we are giving him our trust in his contract to do the right thing for the town. With that said, I do understand the point of how do we confirm an appointment, and I would say the only way we really can do it is by trust in our town administrator, and if you don't trust him, that's another conversation. Richard?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And the only reason I speak is I was involved in the process with the hiring of the Council on Aging Director. Couple issues just to think about, however you decide, whatever you do with it, whether you study it, get legal opinion, et cetera. We had a committee, Ms. Carey was on the committee with me. We had the town administrator put together, I want to say 7 people. We looked at all of the applicants that came in. We ranked with a point system the number of people to interview the top 3. One, who was eventually hired, Ms. Wilson, was currently the Council on Aging Director in another community. She did not want that information getting out because it would jeopardize potentially her employment with that other community. You have to be very, very careful of how you do it. And frankly, if 3 names were coming forward with that particular appointment to you, it also goes back to a committee that has served, and we spent some hours looking at these resumes, meeting, interviewing all of these people. It's belittling the work of a committee that has been appointed by the town administrator to help hire someone in the town. So I think you have to be careful of how you're going to do it, and second-guessing or taking the top 3 or whatever you want of applicants. You've got to have some faith in either your committee that you're working with or your town administrator, who are professionals in doing that.
Or both.
Or both. You know.
Thank
So
you.
I would be careful of going down how you're going to do that. It could get very technical and very legal.
Chris, one last thing, and actually, there's a few more questions here, but one last thing, and I've seen it in other towns, but I'm not sure it's a charter provision. The Board of Selectmen appoints a personnel board, and the personnel board would be consistent of 1 or 2 board members that would sit with you on hires. Is that something you've witnessed, seen? Is that
Yeah,
an
I've
option
had,
for us to look at?
I've had 2 towns out of the towns that I've worked in that had personnel boards. So, I mean, I've had that, generally not a member of the selectmen, another board that is formed to act as an additional check and balance.
You know?
I appreciate what Richard was just saying, and I understand Chris's position. I guess my thought is that the charter allows for the vote of 4 members of the board to deny an appointment. So why does it allow that? If we can't, I think Dawn's point is, how are we denying something when we don't have anything to compare it to? So, because Dawn's also been selectman before and he's coming back to the board, having served on the Charter Review Committee, I understand where his train of thought is. There seems to be kind of a discrepancy between what might be legal, what might be moral, and what is written in the charter. So we have to justify all of these things and come up with either new language or a new policy that is congruous with the language that already exists, I think.
Julie?
Well, first of all, I just want to be clear that, Chris, in no way, shape, or form am I looking to undermine you. So, and I certainly don't want to do anything illegal or cause anything, any kind of a hornet's nest. It's, to me, I'm not trying to complicate it. I'm just trying to understand it. To your point, Janelle, there's a bunch of mitigating factors in here that I'm having a hard time separating out to make that decision. I'm certainly not going to deny somebody when I have no basis to deny somebody, and yet I feel at odds with appointing somebody when I don't really have that information. Although I certainly don't want to put anybody's job in jeopardy. I wouldn't want my name out there either. So I understand all these pieces, so I can't say I know what the answer is, but I feel like the process is somewhere it's broken, or maybe to a larger point, and again, I know it's a budget issue, so it's probably the wrong thing to say, but maybe we need a personnel department. We don't have that, so.
Larry?
Yeah, let me weigh in now, but
Now that everyone's done?
now that everyone's done.
Now that I see
Well,
Just go
I-
ditto.
go ditto. I'm not so sure the process is broken. I think we've hired a town administrator. I think in the times, in my previous 6 years, there's only one time where we had a disagreement come in front of us that might reach this, and this was a strange situation where a committee recommended a promotion, and actually the department head was against it. And then we debated that, and it came out, and we did take a position on that. But I think if we take a step and muddy this up in a way, it does throw, even though we don't mean that to be an inference against what we've asked the town administrator to do, it appears that way to the outsider. We put so many steps in that it's hard to do the job. And I agree with you, Michael. We need a person responsible. If we don't like it, then unfortunately, we change that aspect of it.
Don? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Larry.
I lost my train of thought now, but I think that,
Nice job.
yeah, nice job.
I meant him. He jolted you out of your thoughts.
I'd be reluctant because actually the charter seems to give us the flexibility to do kind of what we want on this. And so we can, because your statement is, Well, let me clarify one thing, though. We have department heads that we do have a say on. All the other appointments, we have 14 days to reject them. That's different than having a positive, proactive review of all the candidates. I think we need to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I would remind the board too that when I started, that it was the practice prior to my arrival that names would not even be presented to the board unless they were the four. That's what I was informed, that the prior administrator would just appoint people and not even give that opportunity for the board to have that confirmation or not confirmation vote. The second is, you know, I've been in this business a long time, and I know that there are other people that do hire their friends or hire people they previously worked with and so on. You know, I got into this profession for the purposes of building a professional organization, because I ultimately believe a professional organization is going to be stronger. And I do include, and I think, as you just heard, a very inclusive process in that to get a broad base of information. So I give myself the ability to have a process that's going to get talents from different people to make sure we bring that to bear. So when we hire people that are of quality. And that, I don't know if that was done before. What I know is there were certain things that I put into place when I started that were not in place prior.
Don?
Two thoughts. I find it somewhat frightening that we keep bringing up well, if you leak anything here, are you presupposing that anything that goes through an executive session, that we're going out and talking to people in supermarkets then? Because this is no different than that. We are privy to a bunch of things in confidential packets that the public doesn't ever get to know, but that's because we're honor bound. And we are honor bound, even if we find out the other names. This isn't an option for the department heads, and the other named people, the assistant administrator, the police chief, fire chief. It's not an option. We're confirming, affirmatively voting to confirm the appointment in those things. So how would you be able to base that decision if you don't know any names at all, except for the one that's brought forward? I'm not suggesting a system where we willy-nilly post them on a bulletin board outside the building and say, here are the 21 people who applied to this. And I am certainly not saying that everyone wasn't disposing of their duties properly. But the charter actually gives us a requirement and a responsibility in that area, and the option in another area. But I'm saying that I don't see how you can avail yourself of either of those things when you don't know anything.
So if it's pleases the board, let me do a little more research on this.
But I'm thinking confidential packet. I'm certainly not thinking of anybody being outed at any point.
Imagine we could talk about this until tomorrow if we wanted.
Yeah.
But let's, I'll have a conversation with Chris and then obtain another opinion on this, and then we'll bring it back. I was going to let it go, Chris, but I can't. It's not my nature. Your opening comment about the agenda item and just reading it.
Yeah.
I made this agenda item on Wednesday. Usually you're at that meeting. I know you weren't, but I would assume that my town administrator coming into a board meeting would know what was on the agenda. And this clearly states discussion. So I'm a little surprised that you're surprised with what the line item is.
I just
I'll
was
leave it
more
at that.
intent to where the intent was behind it,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Moving on to the MMA Annual Meeting and Trade Show. We talked about this in the past, and this was, last year we talked about the total cost to the town if everybody that was allowed to go went. So Sandy, trying to get things done before last minute, has asked us, I think last week or the week before, to please let her know your intent on going or not going. My only caveat with that would be, and with administration as well, Charlene probably shouldn't be at the same things as Chris, and vice versa. And if the board is going to go, the board should probably pick some things. So I would request, in fairness to staff, that we let them know as soon as possible, tomorrow, whether you're gonna go or not go to MMA. And Chris, just to follow up on that, if you could just let me know your intention, Charlene's intention, and anyone from Finance Committee that you know may or may not attend.
should we limit the number of selectmen that can go? I mean, last year, when we went through the budget, I mean, it was me who said, hey, kind of a waste of money for everybody to go.
Yeah, I personally think that, but I think that each board member has the right to go if they want to go, and they should just say it. If it gets to be a $15,000 line item, then we bring it back and we have the conversation. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to counterbalance that just a little bit. It'd be hard to get to $15,000 with one night for a hotel and just going up, taking workshops and then coming back after the other workshops are done.
It's 2
Might-
nights.
Not necessarily. I mean, could be one night. 2 nights if you want to go to the banquet dinner, which I suppose the public could view as us entertaining ourselves. But there's a lot of very important things, like Julie's been talking about the One Cape thing. Well, let's think about One Cape being replicated 20 times. There are workshops on dozens of things there. If we limit ourselves to 1 or 2 people, you're limiting yourself to 1 or 2 workshops that can be reported on. There's a lot of ideas there that other people do things in certain ways, including some of the things that we're currently doing that we found out about like 15 years ago.
So I agree with all that. Let's just get it to Sandy so that she can plan. And if you want to be fiscally responsible for the town, don't go spend the night and don't go to the banquet. Go to the seminars and come home.
I do
I've,
think,
can-
I do think, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that really drove the cost is people staying 3 nights. And, you know, quite honestly, I mean, I kind of go in, Boston's a tough place to get in and out of. So driving in 2 days is a hassle because you sit in traffic so long. But, you know, I think if people could limit to 1 night, and I do think each selectman learns something. And just for Charlene and I usually will look at the list, and then I'll go to ones and she goes to one. So we do divvy it up. And I think that that's reasonable for the board members.
Divvy it.
Larry,
Thank you.
it's coming out of the seat.
Yeah, I've already sent Sandy the paperwork to go. I think it's very useful. I went each year when I was selectman before. I think all of our practice, or most of us stayed 1 night. That's my intent this time, to go up on Friday, stay Friday night, come back on. I notice they've made it a little more difficult now to satisfy the vendors. They have Friday afternoon discussions.
Yeah.
And then Saturday afternoon, it used to be Saturday morning, we could leave at Saturday noon and come back. I'm sure they've done that to get people at the vendors on Saturday morning to hang around there. But I found the talks also be useful. I found the network can be useful and the vendors be useful. And I think 1 night's enough, you know. Still, because if you stay through it at 5, you get home at reasonable. I mean, I go to bed early, so I'll even make it home by bedtime.
Okay, so if you're gonna go, please get your stuff to Sandy, like tomorrow.
And go to bed early.
Staff is great, but they have a lot to do. Go ahead. Do you have anything?
Well, I was going to say, you know, there's so many great workshops, and I had suggested this last year too, that we don't go to the same ones, and that we can share information when we come back. And just looking through the workshops this year, there's some really good ones. And then also, so the valet parking was a huge cost, I think, for, you can't just park your car, you know, so it's like $30 a night or something like that, $60 a
More,
night.
like 60 or 70.
And then every time you want to use your car, so maybe carpooling, like we should have a discussion about it, I think, just to save the town money. Maybe share a room. There's rooms with 2 beds, you know.
I don't share rooms. But I'll pay for my own. Chris, Town Administrator's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple things tonight. On the recycling, we did receive a grant program of about $12,000, so we have received that again. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge it. Also, there was some press coverage that there was a Cape Cod water resource. In total, it was about $10 million of federal project. We were on the list for Colebrook, and we have been given an initial nod there that the feds will fund it. So our piece, I will try to get additional details. That was something that had been previously funded and in the works, but we will continue to link that up with the Colebrook project that the townspeople voted. And then also just 2 weeks from tonight is the Cape Cod Tech school vote. And again, just as a reminder to folks, I know it's late, but just quickly that there'll be 2 ballots. One is really to authorize whether the project goes forward. So that's the tech school component. And then the second is a local ballot that's which this board approved, for the debt exclusion to pay for the project. If it gets approved, what the additional assessment would be for the capital component of that only. And then I know tonight we had housing. There is a free education element. I did sign up for that, so it's every Thursday night for the next 6 Thursdays.
I've signed up for it.
I signed up, yeah.
Okay, I thought that would be good where, you know, housing is a kind of a big topic. So I think that's a good opportunity to kind of pick up additional skills, so I'm planning on going to that. And it's free, obviously, for the...
Maybe we can get an update from those attending, for those that don't attend at the weekly board meetings,
Yeah, be
like
good.
you do with the wastewater and Dennis.
And that concludes my comments this evening, Mr. Chairman.
Selectmen's report. Larry?
I don't have a report, but I do have a question on concerning the tech school vote on the 24th. We've discussed it a lot, but I don't think we've taken a vote on that. Should we take a vote on that? I know other towns they've done it, the Board of Selectmen and FinCom.
Yeah, since Larry brought that up, I know Superintendent, his name's flew out of my head, Sanborn, you know, had said to me, I went to a building committee meeting, I have one tomorrow, building committee, and he did remind me that Harwich is one of the only towns that didn't officially, and I think, Mr. Chairman, after he did his presentation, that there was some discussion about the ballot, and you said that maybe we get back. But I don't know if the board wants to
I'll
put
look
that on
at
the
putting it
agenda.
on next week. My own opinion on that, and I think we gotta stop there, because it's not agended.
Yeah.
Our job is to bring it before the voters, not tell them. In my mind, I'm not sure that we're supposed to be taking a position on it, but that's just my own sense.
Yeah.
So I would abstain, but I'll put it on the agenda next week. Julie, Selectmen's report?
No, I don't have anything.
Don?
No, unless it's going to be a sleepover.
No. So I just would like to take a minute and thank Ann and Sandy in the office publicly. The amount of work that they do and the speed at which they get us the information, it's outstanding. I sent them probably 25 emails today, and I got 25 responses today, probably within 15 minutes. I did get a bit of an eyebrow raise from Sandy when I did visit the office later. But
I don't believe that.
those two ladies, 16 and 17 years experience or time in the front office shows, and they deserve to be congratulated.
Especially the minutes.
Yeah, and the minutes, everything that they do for us, but the volume and the depth of the information is second to
Yeah,
none.
you know, Mr. Chairman, on that, I did those, the hearing, I think you sat in on the hearing, and I was shocked at how great those notes were. That was an hour and a half, and she captured, Ann in this case, captured a flavor of that and turned that around in a matter of a few days. It's just really outstanding effort to acknowledge that,
I
too.
sat in as well,
think it's
Chris, and
important.
read those minutes tonight, and I was shocked that she was able to get that
To
much.
keep up with it.
So, but kudos to the Ann and Sandy in the office.
Yep.
I agree.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.